The laundromat was nearly empty, just the hum of the machines and the rattle of coins in a dryer that had seen too many years. I sat with my elbows on my knees, watching shirts blur behind the glass like they belonged to someone else's life. She was already there when I walked in. Corner seat, paperback balanced on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in minutes. Her basket was smaller than mine, just a few pieces folded neatly in a canvas bag at her feet. We'd seen each other before. Not enough to know anything, but enough for a nod, a smile that never asked for more. She lived in the building across from mine, I knew because I'd caught the glow of her kitchen light while making instant noodles at 2 in the morning. Tonight, though, the silence felt different. "You always do this late?" she asked, voice low, like she wasn't sure if she wanted the question to land. "Yeah. Less crowded," I said. I rubbed at a stain on my jeans that wasn't going anywhere. She nodded once, as if that was enough. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You fold your shirts wrong." I laughed softly, unsure if it was an insult or advice. "You watching me?" Her eyes flicked up from her book. "It's hard not to." That stayed between us, heavier than it should have been. I felt my face heat, so I busied myself, pulling a sleeve straight, checking my phone for messages I already knew weren't there. One draft sat unsent in my notes app, something I typed weeks ago and couldn't bring myself to send. Just a half line, "You still awake?" The dryer buzzed. Too loud for the room. I opened the door, pulled out the heat-heavy fabric, and began folding clumsily, aware of her gaze even when she didn't lift her eyes. "Your hands," she said suddenly, her voice catching me mid-fold. I froze. "What about them?" She tilted her head, studying the way my fingers pressed a shirt into place. Her expression wasn't playful. It was precise. Almost like she was looking through me. "Those don't belong to just anyone," she said. I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a warning. My throat went dry. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, then shook her head, letting the question evaporate. "Never mind." But the silence after was charged. I kept folding, slower this time, aware of every crease, every movement, like my hands had suddenly become something separate from me. I wanted to ask her name, though I already knew it from her mail slot. I wanted to ask what she did with her days, or why she looked like she'd been waiting for something that never arrived. Instead, I said nothing. She closed her book without marking the page, slipped it into her bag, and stood. Her jacket slid over her shoulders in one clean motion. For a moment, I thought she'd leave without another word. But at the door, she paused. "You'll get better at folding," she said softly, not turning back. Then, almost to herself, "Or maybe not." The door chimed, and she was gone. I sat there with my clothes in a pile, my phone buzzing with a spam notification, the words she left me circling like loose change in a dryer, "Those don't belong to just anyone." And I couldn't decide if she'd meant it as a beginning, or an ending. The next time I saw her wasn't at the laundromat. It was outside her building, late afternoon, the sky pressed down heavy with rain that hadn't started yet. She was carrying 2 grocery bags that looked heavier than she'd planned for, and one strap dug into the soft part of her hand. "Let me," I said, already reaching before I could think better of it. She hesitated a second too long before loosening her grip. "You don't have to." "I know." I took the bag anyway. We climbed the narrow stairs together, the air between us filled with the creak of old wood and her unhurried breathing. Her door was just one flight above mine, something I'd always known but never had reason to admit. Inside, her apartment smelled faintly of bergamot tea and laundry detergent. Lived in, but not cluttered. She set her bag down on the counter and pulled her hair back, exposing the sharp line of her jaw. "Tea?" she asked, like it was routine, like I'd been there before. I nodded, though I never drank tea unless someone offered. She filled the kettle, and I caught myself studying her hands. The same ones that had stopped me cold a week ago. She wore no rings. Not even the pale line of one removed. You live alone? I asked, immediately regretting how blunt it sounded. Yes. She didn't flinch. Used to be otherwise. Her tone was even, but the pause stretched. She slid the mugs across the counter, the steam rising between us like something that could blur what we shouldn't notice. I wrapped my hands around the cup, mostly for the warmth. I didn't mean to, it's fine, she said quickly, almost too quickly. Then softer, he left years ago. I kept the apartment. Less complicated that way. The kettle clicked into silence, but neither of us moved. I wanted to ask if she was happier now. Or lonelier. Instead, I just sipped the tea and let the burn remind me I was still there, still tethered to something real. Her eyes lingered on me, unguarded, then she looked away, brushing an invisible crumb off the counter. You're young, she said finally. You don't stay still long. Not like this. I almost laughed, but my throat tightened. I don't know. Lately it feels like I've been standing still a lot. She studied me like she wanted to believe that, but couldn't. A silence settled in, not empty but weighted. The kind where you imagine what it might feel like to close the distance, to touch her wrist where it rested on the counter. I didn't. Instead, she reached for the sugar jar, slid it absent-mindedly closer to me, though she hadn't seen how I'd glanced at it. A small, thoughtless kindness that landed heavier than it should have. Thank you, I said, though it wasn't really about the sugar. Her gaze flicked to mine, steady, a fraction longer than necessary. The kind of look that doesn't leave once it's given. And I realized, in that quiet exchange, that the line between us had already shifted. It was raining the next time. Not a storm, just a steady downpour that blurred the streetlights. I ran into her under the awning outside our buildings, both of us waiting it out with bags in hand. You again, she said softly, as if it kept happening by accident. I smiled, but it faltered. Seems that way. The rain drummed against the tin roof above us. She hugged her jacket closer, her hair damp at the edges. For a second, I wanted to say something, anything that would keep her looking at me like that. But I didn't. Instead, she asked, you ever feel like the weather decides things for you? I almost laughed. Yeah. Like it's an excuse to stop moving. She nodded, eyes distant. Sometimes excuses are easier. The silence pressed closer. I shifted, wiped the water off my bag. I wanted to offer to walk her upstairs, but before I could, hey, man. A voice cut through the rain. My friend Mark jogged up, umbrella tilted, oblivious. You coming out tonight? We're all meeting at Carson's. He grinned, barely glancing at her. I shook my head. Not tonight. Lame, he said, clapping my shoulder before disappearing back into the downpour. I felt her watching me, unreadable. Something in her jaw tightened, and she shifted one step back, like the space between us needed to be reset. You should have gone, she said. I didn't want to. She studied me. The air thickened. The kind of pause that makes you think of what you shouldn't think of. I caught myself staring at the curve of her wrist where she held her jacket closed. My mouth opened, then shut again. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her gaze flicked down, then back up, steady, too steady. Careful, she murmured, barely audible under the rain. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The rain slowed, softened. She exhaled, almost relieved, and stepped forward like she'd made her decision. Come upstairs. Just, help me carry this, she added quickly, lifting the bag a little higher. Inside her apartment, everything felt louder. The kettle whistled. The radiator hissed. My own heartbeat in my ears. She handed me a towel for my hair, her fingers brushing mine. Too brief. Too much. I sat on the edge of the couch, towel in my lap, while she moved about the kitchen like it was safer not to face me. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "So are you." Her hand stilled on the counter. Then she turned, leaning back against it, eyes on me. Long enough to say everything without a word. I shifted forward, elbows on my knees, caught in that pull I couldn't name. The space between us thinned. Her lips parted, like she might say something, like she might close the distance herself. But then she pressed them together, shook her head slightly, and looked away. I stayed where I was. Half a breath from something I shouldn't want. It was late, the kind of night where the streets emptied early and the air felt too still. I found her sitting on the bench outside our building, a paper cup in her hands, steam curling into the cool air. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, sliding down onto the other end. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts. Tea helps." I nodded, watching the glow from the street lamp paint her face softer than usual. She looked younger and older at once. For a while, neither of us said anything. Just the sound of cars passing in the distance, the faint scrape of her thumb along the rim of the cup. Then she asked, quietly, "Do your friends know you sit out here with me?" I turned to her, caught off guard. "No. Why would they?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Because they'd have something to say. They always do." The words landed heavier than I expected. She wasn't wrong. I pictured Mark, the way he'd rib me about it, the way his voice would twist it into something cheap. "Let them talk," I said, though it sounded braver than I felt. She studied me, like she was testing the weight of that answer. "You don't understand yet. They'd make a joke of it. Of me." I opened my mouth, then closed it. My throat tightened. "You think I haven't noticed?" she went on, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. "The way people look at me when I walk in alone. The way they decide what story I must fit into." Her hand trembled slightly, and she set the cup down on the bench beside her. "Is that why you—" I stopped, fumbling. "Why you pull back?" Her eyes flicked to mine. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, quietly, "It's not just that." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, searching for words. "Then what is it?" Her silence stretched. She looked down at her hands, those hands, and let out a shaky breath. "Because it would matter too much." The air caught in my chest. I wanted to say I understood. That she wasn't the only one lying awake, staring at ceilings, wondering what line we were walking. Instead, I said, "You think I don't feel that too?" She blinked, startled, like I'd gone further than she expected. The quiet between us thickened. I shifted closer, not touching, but near enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her sleeve. Her gaze dropped to my hand on the bench, fingers curled into the wood. She stared at it a beat too long, then slowly reached out, hovered, before pulling back, curling her hand into her lap instead. The smallest movement. But it felt like the whole world paused around it. Her voice broke the silence, softer than I'd ever heard it. "You don't know what you're asking for." And I almost told her, almost let it slip, that I already did. She stopped coming to the laundromat. At first, I told myself it was timing, maybe she'd switched days, maybe she'd found a service. But the weeks passed, and the machines kept spinning without her. I saw her less, too. Lights in her kitchen later than usual, blinds drawn when they hadn't been before. When we did cross paths, her smile was thin, polite, as if it had been rehearsed. Something had shifted. One evening, I caught her outside, locking her door. She wore a coat I hadn't seen before, hair swept up, perfume faint but deliberate. She looked unreachable. "Going out?" I asked, pretending not to notice how carefully she avoided my eyes. "Yes. Just that." A pause stretched, the kind where I should have let her leave. But I didn't. "Dinner?" Her hand stilled on the lock. "Not exactly." She glanced at me then, a flicker of something in her eyes, apology? Warning, before she turned away. I wanted to ask who. I didn't. The door closed behind her, and I stood there with words burning holes in my pocket. Later that night, I sat on my couch, staring at my phone. Drafting, deleting. Drafting again. Did you get home safe? I didn't mean to, are you with? None of it made it past the blinking cursor. The next day, Mark cornered me outside the corner store, smirking. Saw your neighbor last night. She's still got it, huh? I froze. What do you mean? He laughed, shaking his head. Relax. Just saying, older women like that, they don't waste their time. Someone's keeping her company. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That he didn't see the way she sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup like it was holding her together. That he didn't know the silence between us, the weight of it. But the truth was, I didn't know either. That evening, I passed her door. For the first time, I almost knocked. My knuckles hovered an inch from the wood. I could hear faint music inside, something slow, something unfamiliar. I pulled my hand back. Instead, I walked to my apartment, sat down, and opened the Notes app on my phone. Typed one line. I missed the way you looked at me that night. I stared at it until the letters blurred, then locked the screen without sending. The word sat there, unsent, like everything else between us. And for the first time, I wondered if silence was the only language we'd ever speak. It was late again when it finally happened. I heard the knock, soft, uncertain, and when I opened the door she was standing there in her cardigan, hair loose, eyes tired. I didn't wake you, did I? She asked. No, I stepped aside, but she hesitated before crossing the threshold, as if the line mattered more tonight than ever. Inside, I set the kettle going out of habit, though neither of us really wanted tea. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, staring at the floor like it held the words she couldn't say. I shouldn't be here, she murmured. I swallowed. Then why are you? That broke something. Her shoulders stiffened, then loosened, like she'd been carrying a weight too long. Because I can't stop thinking about you, she said quietly. And I hate myself for it. The words hung in the air, sharp, fragile. I froze, heart knocking hard against my ribs. You think I don't? I stopped, ran a hand over my face. I've been trying to push it down. Pretend it's not there. But every time I see you, her eyes flicked up, meeting mine for the first time. Raw. Exposed. I'm too old for this, she whispered. For you. I shook my head. That's not how I see you. Her lips pressed together, trembling. It doesn't matter how you see me. People will talk. They'll laugh. And I can't. I can't let you carry that. The kettle whistled, piercing the moment, but neither of us moved to stop it. I took a step closer, close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her breath caught in her throat. You think I care about that? My voice was barely above a whisper. I care about this. About you. Her arms dropped, and for a second, her hand brushed mine. A touch so small it could have been an accident. But it wasn't. We stood there, suspended in the hum of the kitchen light, the whistle behind us fading as the kettle clicked off. Finally, she exhaled, a sound that was half surrender, half fear. You'll regret me, she said softly. I shook my head again, firmer this time. No. I'd regret never saying it. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Then, slowly, she reached up, fingers grazing my cheek like she was testing if I was real. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a promise. Just a touch, human, unguarded, trembling. And when she pulled her hand back, she gave me the smallest smile. Fragile, but alive. Okay, she whispered. It was enough. The months that followed didn't look like much from the outside. No sudden declarations, no dramatic leaps. Just, shifts. She still went to the laundromat, though now it was earlier in the evening, and sometimes I went with her. We folded in silence most nights, but there was comfort in the silence now. My shirts ended up neater. Not perfect, but neater. Sometimes I'd find her waiting on the bench outside, paper cup in hand. 8:47 p.m. once, 8:47 a.m. another time. Always the same spot, like the bench had turned into a marker for us. I'd sit down, and she'd pass me her tea before I could even ask. We never really spoke about that night in my kitchen. About the confession, or the trembling hand on my cheek. We didn't need to. Life just adjusted around it. On Saturday mornings, I started cooking real breakfasts instead of instant noodles. She'd wander over, hair tied up, robe sleeves pushed to her elbows. She always claimed she only came for the coffee, but she lingered long after the mugs were empty. Once, I caught her humming while rinsing dishes in my sink. A low, tuneless sound, but it filled the room in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. There were still moments of doubt. A neighbor's glance that lingered too long. A friend's offhand joke. Her hand stiffening when someone asked if she was seeing anyone. But when the door closed and it was just us, the edges softened again. One evening, I found her asleep on my couch, book slipping from her hand. I tucked the blanket around her and sat down at the other end, watching her breathe. For the first time, I didn't feel restless. I didn't feel like I should be anywhere else. Later, when she stirred awake, she mumbled, "You fold shirts better now." I smiled in the dark. "Only because you ruined me for crooked sleeves." She laughed, soft and half asleep, and reached out without opening her eyes. Her hand found mine on the cushion, and she held on. Not tight. Just enough. It was then I realized, this wasn't about beginnings or endings anymore. It was about the space in between. The routines. The tea left waiting. The unsent messages no longer needed. We never called it love out loud. We didn't have to. One night, sitting again on that same bench, the street lamp buzzing faintly above us, she leaned into my shoulder and whispered, "It feels better when it's quiet, doesn't it?" I nodded, breathing in the warmth of her hair, the weight of her leaning against me. And that was enough. More than enough. Because we both knew, without needing to say it, that not everything has to be folded perfectly to belong.